What about this chief argument that comes up for the president's allies and his legal team that this should have been handled under the Presidential Records Act, not this Espionage Act charge and other federal statutes that were used here?
Well, it started out under the Presidential Records Act and the archives trying to retrieve documents that Trump had no right to have. But it quickly became clear that what the government was really worried about were these classified and very sensitive documents. I was shocked by the degree of sensitivity of these documents and how many there were, frankly. And so the government's agenda was to get those, protect those documents and get them out. And I think it was perfectly appropriate to do that. It was the right thing to do. And I think the counts under the Espionage Act that he willfully retained those documents are solid counts. Now, I do think we have to wait and see what the defense says and what proves to be true. But I do think that even half what Andy McCarthy said, which is if even half of it is true, then he's toast. I mean, it's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning.
On Fox News yesterday, our good buddy Brett Baer had Bill Barr on his show. And unbeknownst to me, Brett decided to play some of my statement on Hannity from the night before. And Mediocrite, which is filled with prepubescent Neanderthals. And we've come to notice here that when Mediocrite does that, the Huffington Post and the Daily Beast usually regurgitate it. Now, why is that? Because they're stupid, that's why. Bill Barr was Attorney General before Hillary Clinton destroyed her emails and destroyed her cell phones and had a private server in her home basement, which had classified information traveling through it. And he was Attorney General after that occurred as well. Now his purpose in life is as a attack dog against Trump. He wanted Trump indicted. The enemy, the adversaries at the Department of Justice and FBI heard his calls, figured they'd get cover from him, and he's on a conga line of media visits, whether it be Meet the Press or CBS or any of the rest, where he's welcome. Wasn't welcome before, but he's welcome now. But let's listen to what he said, and let's see if it makes any sense. Okay? Brett Baer starts with an audio clip or a video clip of me. Cut one, go.
It's called the Presidential Records Act because he is the executive branch. He's the executive branch. So he doesn't have to rely on some subordinate. Here are the regulations. This is the way you do it, Mr. President. His power comes from the Constitution. He is a third branch of government. Him. He alone. Everything else flows from him.
Mark Levin last night on Hannity about the Presidential Records Act and how that fits into the former president's defense. Let's talk about former President Trump and President Biden's legal troubles with former Attorney General Bill Barr. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Brett.
You listened to Mark there, and he is saying that the Presidential Records Act covers what they're seeing here. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think the position is being taken that this is really just a document dispute over custody of documents, and the president has good arguments as to why he should have kept them. I think the arguments are farcical and will be shown as such, but I also think more importantly they're sidelighted and they're distracting from the real issue. The president is being prosecuted here because it's an obstruction case, and he's in trouble for what he did after he got the subpoena. If he thought he had arguments that these were his documents, there are many things he could have done to raise those arguments. He could have moved to quash the subpoena. He could have given the documents to the government and then sued to bring him back and made his legal arguments as to why they're really his. But he didn't do that. What did he do? He engaged in an outrageous act of obstruction and deception that obstructed that subpoena. And that is wrong. That's a law. I mean, that's a violation of law. That's a serious problem for him. What he did was, according to the indictment, he took a lot of the boxes away, hid them from his lawyer, told his lawyer to go and search what remained, and then caused that lawyer to file a statement with the court saying that there had been a complete search. And if anyone did that, that would be obstruction. So that is why I think the Justice Department pulled the trigger, and that's the central part of this case. So talking about whether you had the right to have the documents or not, while it's ridiculous, it's a sideshow. He has you cannot defend what he did with that subpoena.
Now, that's very interesting, so I want to respond to this. Here's one thing Bill Barr cannot do. Bill Barr cannot answer the question, and it's not put to him, if it's an obstruction case. When Hillary Clinton destroyed over 30,000 emails, or had them destroyed, when they destroyed her old cell phones with hammers, all of which were under subpoena, she wasn't investigated for obstruction, let alone accused of obstruction, let alone formally charged with obstruction. Why is that? You just said, Mr. Barr, that nobody can dispute that this is an obstruction case, that the president's conduct was outrageous, and that my argument is ridiculous. I didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday. It wasn't that long ago when the former Secretary of State did what she did. And so, of course, the issue comes down to, among other things, whose documents are they? What law applies? As for subpoenaing the records, you talk about what President Trump could have done. I will tell you what the government could have done. The government could have used the Presidential Records Act. They could have made a claim, perhaps, that those records need to go to the National Archives, where this matter would be sorted out. I don't agree with that, but you can make that argument. Go to a federal judge. Tell the federal judge, we need an order to get the documents from Donald Trump and his lawyers, because we don't believe that they have the right to keep them under the Presidential Records Act. He didn't have to go to a 5-alarm fire. The law is an administrative law. There are civil, potentially, remedies. There are remedies in equity, if you will. And you go to the federal judge, and this is done all the time. I've done this. And you say, we have reason to believe there's problems with these documents. We need to get control over these documents. Can we have an order? If the judge agrees with you, you're applying the correct law, not the underlying law, the Espionage Act, but the right law, the Presidential Records Act, a possession issue. The judge can issue the order, turn the documents over. This is how I want them turned over. This is the place and time I want them turned over. No delay, every damn one of them. And if the judge's order is defied, the judge can hold that party or those parties in civil or even criminal contempt. I'm embarrassed by Bill Barr and what he says and how he says it. I don't know if he has much litigation experience or not. I just don't know. But it's embarrassing when he sits there on Fox and he says this is an obstruction case. Well, what kind of an obstruction case? Does Bill Barr square this? He can't, and he won't. He'll go around, oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, this is preposterous. Oh, this is this. Now, I don't know what a court's going to do or what a jury's going to do or all the rest of it. I have no idea. None. Except I know it shouldn't be in front of a jury with criminal charges. That much I know. That's not the way this is supposed to work. Lyndon Johnson had classified information removed about the Vietnam War in 1968. One of his aides, Rostow, took the information at his direction. This is before there was a Presidential Records Act. Again, no justification for it. Those records were kept from the public, give or take half a century. So the why question is one they're never going to answer. Well, why did the archives let him get away with it? Why wasn't he pursued with a federal grand jury? Why weren't his lawyers dragged in front of a federal grand jury? Bill Barr said more yesterday with Brett Baer I really like Brett Barry. He's a hell of a reporter.
Using the Espionage Act to make the decision at first to go after him like this, you think is justified?
Now, let's stop here. That is a very good question. Let's hear what he says. Go.
Yeah. The law against willfully retaining national defense information.
Even though it's the President of the United States. At the time, he's leaving with it as the President of the United States.
Yeah, that was a reason. That is a sound charge. That is right. He did not have the right to keep those documents, and he jerked the government.
Did he not say in the prior clip, Mr. Producer, that this is not a documents possession case, but an obstruction case? And now I hear him saying here he did not have a right to possess these documents. You see, folks, obstruction can't possibly come before a determination about an underlying law in which the government is seeking, in this case, documents. This is why he's making no sense to me. You criminalize a case like this, then you say obstruction is separate and apart from the underlying crime. And so he wants it both ways. There would be no, quote-unquote, conspiracy to obstruct, which is a crime, but for the criminalization of a civil act, an administrative act. So that's a circular argument, and it's an outrageous position, particularly since Donald Trump is the only person to ever hold top public office, president, vice president, even a cabinet secretary, to be treated this way. And, of course, their retort will be, well, he should have given the documents. No. That is a dispute. That's okay. Go ahead.
Around for a year. Put yourself in the government's position. You don't know what he has. He can have, you don't know what's at risk.
You don't know where your classified information is? You don't know what he has? Even so, how would a civil order, going to a court seeking an order for the production of information, even an urgent order, we need it in a week, we need a list, we need whatever, that would give you the same information, probably quicker than waiting 3 months, going dark for 3 months. 3 months. That's how urgent it was. 3 months. And then getting a search warrant. And then doing a SWAT team examination. Does this make any sense to anybody? No. Go ahead.
That stuff. What are they to do?
What I just said. But of course they should know. If they believe it's top secret information that it's missing, they're supposed to know that. What are they to do? Check the records. Go to a federal judge. Get an order. Tell the judge, we don't know what he's got. We don't know that they're telling us everything. Go ahead.
I think that was a legitimate charge, but I don't think they would have charged it had he given the documents back. It was the obstruction of the subpoena that I think led the department to pull the trigger.
Okay, now he's not making any sense whatsoever. He just moved in 2 sentences from it's a possession issue to an obstruction of a subpoena. And this is the way it works, bouncing back and forth and back and forth. I do think he's right, though. When you have a Democrat jury in a Democrat city, whether it be New York, Atlanta, even Miami, you have a pretty good shot. So what? What kind of prediction is that? It's no prediction at all. And so, from my perspective, Bill Barr doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Now, he's not the only one. He's not the only one. He's the most prominent.
Virtually everyone is saying that the fake indictment is about election interference and should not have been brought, except Bill Barr, a disgruntled former employee and very weak person, and a very, very lazy attorney general, was totally ineffective. What a shame. What a shame. Such a waste of time. He doesn't mean what he's saying. He's just talking misinformation, just like they talk misinformation with the 51 spies, and Barr should have looked into that one too. Barr's doing it because he hates Trump, because I fired him. It's very simple. I said, give me a letter. I wanted to be nice. He gave me a nice letter, but I fired him. I said, Bill, you're fired. Just give me a letter. He was deathly afraid of the radical left when they said they would impeach him. Maybe I don't blame him, but they impeached me twice and my poll numbers went up. He knows the indictment is total bullshit. He knows it. But he's trying to get even for the fact that he did a lousy job. Turn off Fox News when that gutless guy is on. I watch him sitting there and pontificating, sometimes with other rhinos that are almost as bad, like a very stupid person named John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, who's got nothing going, absolutely nothing. They pay these people a lot of money to say bad things about Trump. It's an incredible thing. But I watch Barr sitting back. He could have done so much. Instead, he's a coward. He was a coward. He didn't do the job he was put there to do. He was so afraid of being impeached. We can't have people like that in our party. We have to get rid of the rhinos and the weak ones, because we're fighting the communists, we're fighting the Marxists and the fascists. We're fighting some very bad people, people that hate our country, people that don't want borders. They want everybody to come in no matter where, from the prisons. They want them to come in from mental institutions. They don't want energy independence. They want high taxes. They want high interest rates. These people want to destroy our country, and we've got to win. So 2024, that's our chance. If we don't do it then, we're never going to get it done. I believe it's the end of our country. Thank you very much.
Andy McCarthy used to be a buddy of mine. Another former this or former that. He said the other day that Presidential Records Act doesn't apply because most of these records weren't created by the White House. I thought to myself, are you kidding me? The issue isn't who created the documents. The issue is in whose possession they are. Not who created the documents. Why would you say such a ridiculous thing? Then today, apparently on the Hugh Hewitt show, and I don't know the full extent of it, he says, I don't even know how the president defends when it comes to the declassification of information, because he'd have to testify. Well, that's how he would defend. What are you talking about? I guess you should just surrender and say, okay, throw me in prison for 250 years. I've always wanted to die in prison. I am just shocked by this. Here's something. The Espionage Act has no application here. None. It didn't have any application when it came to President Johnson. Didn't have any application in any other case. Do you know the National Archives cannot tell us today if any other president or how many presidents have taken classified information with them? They can't even tell us. And if they could, they said they won't. What's that all about? So let's at least agree that this is a case of first impression, since this has never been done before. Can we agree to that, Mr. Producer? He's the only one that's been charged. Correct, America? Whether you want to call it an obstruction case, a possession case, or in the case of Bill Barr, call it both cases, depending on, depending on something. You don't take a case of first impression and bring a slew of indictments. You don't do that. And you certainly don't do it with an ex-president. And you certainly don't do it with an ex-president who's running for president again. Because the matter's not going to be resolved before the election's over. That's a huge problem. Huge. But if you're Jack the Ripper Smith, you don't care. The case of Bob McDonnell, the former Republican governor of Virginia, he ruined him. He took a basic bribery statute and he so massively expanded it to include meetings and phone calls and all these other things that the Supreme Court, in an 8-0 decision, it was a very pointed decision, reversed the conviction. So Bill Barr is right. You might be able to get a conviction, but is it right to get the conviction? Now, the head of the Public Integrity Section at that point, the man who signed off on it, was Jack the Ripper Smith. It was Jack the Ripper Smith contention, again, head of the Public Integrity Section, that money wasn't reported and it violated the limitations on how much a federal candidate can raise. And you might say, well, why? What does that have to do with anything? Because he took the law and he expanded it. He expanded it to include those donations, which had nothing to do with the law whatsoever, but he wanted to get Edwards. Some of these guys, they don't care about doing justice. Doesn't matter. There were 6 felonies brought. One where the jury found Edwards not guilty. The other 5 was a hung jury, and as it turned out, there were a couple of holdouts. The overwhelming majority of the jury was opposed to this, and ABC News interviewed them. The vast majority of them said there wasn't any evidence. There wasn't any evidence. One said there wasn't enough evidence. This is the same guy who's now taken the Espionage Act and twisted it into a pretzel with the cheerleading of Bill Barr and Andy McCarthy. And I don't take this personally whatsoever. It's a debate. It's a debate. That's what it is. Who've taken, in my view, insane positions when it comes to the Espionage Act because they can't answer the why. Why? Why wasn't Hillary Clinton even investigated for obstruction? Why? Why weren't her lawyers, who had a very active role in destroying the emails, why weren't they brought before a grand jury? Why wasn't there a grand jury? Why wasn't there attorney-client privilege undermined through the crime fraud exception? Why did none of these things happen? If Bill Barr is right, they should have, should they not? And again, she didn't even have the Presidential Records Act to deal with. And here's another why. Why did a Clinton, in the Clinton Sox case, where an Obama appointee 11 years ago ruled that the Presidential Records Act gave a very broad right to a former president to determine what is his personally, and she, and not the National Archives or anybody else, had the power under that federal statute to claim otherwise. Why did she rule that way, Bill Barr? Why did she rule that way, Andy McCarthy? Why? How come the Attorney General didn't trigger the Espionage Act, impanel a grand jury, and go after Bill Clinton? Why? Yeah, why?